Hey Dungeons & Dragons community, I love D&D, and 5th edition is my favorite edition, but it's not perfect. And I think most of us agree a couple adjustments could make things even better. I've done a series of those adjustments, and I'm providing them to anyone who wants them. If you want to try it out, there are links in the video description. Feel free to download them, share them, and use them. In these videos, I'm going to be explaining how these adjustments work and why I made any decisions for the changes I made. Today I'm going to be going through my changes to the Rogue. Now the Rogue is the last class I'm going to be doing, but the Treantmonk variant will continue next week, and we're going to start talking about other aspects of the game, including feats, spells, and races, and a few just rule tweaks that I think are going to work out nicely at your table. As always, a link to the document is in the video description, and if you want to come back to this video, there will be a link from that document back to this video. So as I mentioned, today we are talking about the Rogue. Now the Rogue is a martial class, and some people I've heard say it's not a martial class. Rogues are about skills, they're about doing other things. But in combat, what a rogue does is they attack an enemy, hopefully with a sneak attack, to deliver a lot of damage. And that's what they do in combat. They might hide in combat, they might move around in combat, but ultimately, pretty much every turn, we would expect the rogue to make a single attack roll. If it hits, it does a lot of damage. Now, when we compare the rogue to other martial classes, what we find is defensively, the rogue is a lot worse. The rogue is going to have less hit points than most martial classes, and they're going to end up with a lower armor class than other martial classes, even if they get their dexterity up to 20. Just because light armor gives such a small armor class bonus, and they're not getting anything else like shields on top of that. So in general, their armor class is going to be lower than other martials, and they're going to have less hit points. Now, offensively, a rogue will actually do pretty similar, even better damage than other martials at very low levels. But once extra attack comes in at 5th level, then rogues start to fall behind in damage, and that continues throughout the rest of their career. So what will end up happening is a rogue will deliver more damage on their attack, but because they're only making one attack, they do less damage overall. So then we have a rogue that is worse on defense and worse on offense. Now, if you're an optimizer, that doesn't mean you never play a rogue, because as an optimizer, we've figured out how to get around that. And the way to get around that is sneak attack, because sneak attack limits you to using it once per turn, but it does not limit you to using it once per round. So the key to making the rogue effective as an offensive character is to be able to get a sneak attack when it's not your turn. And that would generally be done by using your reaction, and then you're combining it with something like an opportunity attack, for example. Now, opportunity attacks tend not to come up every round, but there's things we can do. If you take a few levels of fighter and go battle master, you can grab riposte. If you take the sentinel feat, we can often use that to get additional opportunity attacks. There's ways to do it, but it requires some careful optimization. And when you do so, then what you end up with is a rogue that uses the reaction every round, but in most rounds they're getting 2 attacks. And those attacks occur on different turns, so you get your sneak attack twice each round. When you do that, then the rogue is very comparable in damage to other martials all the way up to level 20. So it can be done, but it requires some significant optimization. If you are just playing a rogue, and I see this all the time, players who don't know how to optimize a rogue, what they end up doing is they do that one attack each round, and it either hits and does decent damage, or it misses and does nothing. But overall, they're delivering less damage, and they are more vulnerable. And that's not to say that the rogue's not a popular class. People love playing the rogue. Statistics show that the rogue is one of the most played classes in all D&D. And I think part of the reason for that is rogues are a lot of fun when you're not in combat, because there's so many other flavorful things built around the rogue. Mainly we're talking about sneaking and stealing and that kind of stuff, right? The thiefy kind of stuff. Though often we're talking about things like scouting, or we're talking about things like infiltrating, one way or the other, rogues tend to have lots of fun stuff they can do outside of combat. In combat, though, then they end up being pretty effective at low levels and not nearly as effective once we get to level 5, unless we do a lot of optimization. So one thing I wanted to do with the rogue was definitely take a look at that and see how we could make it so that the rogue, number one, didn't require that optimization to be able to maintain their combat effectiveness, but number two, make sure that I didn't add something that could be combined with optimization to make it out of control. So I felt whatever I had to do had to either limit the sneak attack to once per round and make it better, or be able to provide a method for all rogues to be able to use their reaction to maybe make an attack when it's not their turn, thus using up their reaction. And because you're limited to one reaction, it couldn't be combined with other optimization techniques. The other thing I wanted to do with the rogue is when I look at the subclasses, I find that the Arcane Trickster is lovely. We get a bunch of class abilities. I think overall the class abilities work reasonably well, and then we get spells on top of that. Now, if we look at the Thief overall works reasonably well as well, because they get a number of class abilities that are pretty effective, and so can make up for not having spells to some degree. In fact, their 17th level ability, which is effectively the capstone of the subclass, will give them an additional sneak attack that they can take in their round. So Thief Rogue can potentially get 3 sneak attacks a round. So they're doing reasonably well as well. My main problem with the Thief is that they have one ability that I think doesn't work at all, and I'll talk about that. And then we have the Assassin. Now, I love the idea of an Assassin. An Assassin is the kind of character that I might want to play. But what I found was that if you look at the Assassin, the 3rd level ability is very clearly flavorful in a way that I would expect an Assassin to be. But as we go up in levels, what we find is that it really just steers you to one type of assassination. And that is, you're going to spend a lot of time, you're going to assume a false identity and infiltrate. And I guess that is going to give you the opportunity to make your assassination. But there's lots of assassins that work in different ways. Some might just break in and slit your throat. Others might poison you. Those aren't addressed. We really are pigeonholed into one kind of assassin, and a kind of assassin that isn't necessarily going to be effective at dungeon crawling. They are going to be effective in a campaign that's based in a static location with long periods of time in between, so they can make use of their class abilities. And I don't think that's what we want with subclasses for player characters, because a lot of campaigns aren't in a static location giving you long periods of time. And so then that subclass gives you an ability at 3rd level. That seems pretty good. But as we move up in levels, we're going to get abilities that we're just never going to be able to use. So I wanted to address that as well. So those were my goals as I went in to look at the rogue. Let's get started. So this is the rogue, the Treantmonk variant. The first thing to point out here is the class chart does have one change at 5th level. They used to get Uncanny Dodge, they now get Skirmish. Skirmish is lightly based on Uncanny Dodge, but it's a little bit different. But when we go into the class features, most of the stuff here is the same. Hit points, proficiencies, equipment, expertise, sneak attack, thieves' cant, cunning action, your archetype, your ability score improvements, all remain exactly the same. The first change we have with the rogue is at 5th level, and that's the Skirmish ability that replaces Uncanny Dodge. Now, Uncanny Dodge was an ability that allowed you to use your reaction to half the damage of an attack that hits you. One thing about that, and talking to a few other people as well, is that when we think about rogue, we're thinking about risk takers, and I kind of would like to see their defensive option be a bit more of an all or nothing thing rather than a half damage thing. So just flavor-wise, I kind of like that. I don't think it's more or less powerful. I think in the long run, you're going to end up taking about the same amount of damage. But just in terms of flavor, I like the idea of we can either completely avoid the attack, or we're going to take the damage from the attack. And the other thing is, 5th level was the level where I started to see that the rogues fell behind in damage, and I wanted to take care of that in the way that I talked about at the beginning of the video. So those were the goals as I went into the ability at 5th level, which I call Skirmish. Starting at 5th level, you've mastered the ability to take advantage of an enemy that exposes themselves. When an enemy you can see makes an attack against you, you may use your reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your armor class, and you may immediately make a weapon attack against that enemy. So we're accomplishing two things here. The first thing we're accomplishing is kind of the all or nothing flavor thing. And then the second thing we're accomplishing is the ability for the rogue to make an attack when it's not their turn, and make it just easier to go that route without requiring the optimization. But we're also blocking the road from those optimizations that occurred before, because this does require the use of your reaction. When we chart out the damage, assuming you're going to get a reaction attack with Skirmish, we will find that the rogue does damage similar to what we see with my Barbarian variant, similar to what we see with my Fighter variant. And it's not even higher than them, but it's in the same league as them. And that's where we want it to be. We want the rogue to be one of the more effective damage dealers in combat, and it keeps them in line with the martials, as I figure they should be. Now, expertise, evasion, reliable, talent all remain the same. The next change I made was to blind sense. Now, what the original blind sense did is, starting at 14th level, if you were able to hear, you were aware of the location of any hidden or invisible creature within 10 feet of you. Now, the odd thing about this ability is that, normally speaking, unless they're hidden, you're already aware of any invisible creature within 10 feet of you. You already know the location of any invisible creature within 10 feet of you. In fact, you know the location of an invisible creature further than 10 feet from you. You need to take the hide action in addition to being invisible if you want people to not be aware of your location. So unless we had a situation where somebody invisible came up to us and then hid, which doesn't seem to come up very often, Blind Sense didn't do a heck of a lot for you. What you could do is, if there was somebody hidden in a room and you wanted to search for them, Blind Sense could really help you out then. But in terms of what it sounds like it can do, because what it sounds like it should be able to do is, if somebody's in combat with you and they're invisible, then you basically are treating them like they're not invisible. But it doesn't do that. If they're invisible, you cannot see them. Blind Sense doesn't allow you to see them. It just makes you aware of their location, which you were already, and when you attack them, you have disadvantage, and now you don't get your sneak attack. So I wanted to keep this ability, but I wanted to change it so that it worked the way that it sounds like it should. So now, starting at 14th level, if you're able to hear, you are aware of the location of any hidden or invisible creature within 10 feet of you, and you do not suffer disadvantage when attacking a creature you are aware of. So now the invisible creature comes up and attacks you. As usual, you are aware of them, but now the advantage of Blind Sense is you can attack them without the disadvantage. Slippery Mind and Elusive I've kept the same, and then that brings us into our capstone. So what the capstone used to do at 20th level is, once per rest, short or long rest, when you failed an ability check or an attack roll, you could revise it and basically have it be successful instead. You could have the ability check treated as if you rolled a 20, and an attack that missed would hit. And that is decently good. It's definitely something you're going to be able to use. I'm not sure it's 20th level good, and honestly, I mean, one ability check or one attack roll, it's nice to have, but it's not a huge thing over an entire short rest. And another thing that struck me as odd is Stroke of Luck couldn't be used on saving throws. It's a Stroke of Luck. I would have thought saving throws would have been the first thing it would have been useful on. So what I wanted to do was give it a little bit more use, and I wanted to include saving throws. So now at 20th level, you have an uncanny knack for succeeding when you need to. If your attack misses a target within range, you can turn the miss into a hit. If you fail an ability check, you can treat the d20 roll as a 20. If you fail a saving throw, you can treat the d20 roll as a 20. You may replace a single attack roll, ability check, and saving throw once. Once you do so, you may not do so again until you finish a short or long rest. So just to make this clear, essentially you have three uses of this ability. You have one use to turn an attack that misses into a hit. You have one use to change an ability check and you have 1 use to change the saving throw. So you're limited in what those 3 things can be, but essentially you have 3 uses of Stroke of Luck now. So now going into the roguish archetypes, Arcane Trickster is the one archetype I didn't change. Arcane Trickster, I think, works quite well. Some of the abilities are more powerful, some of the abilities are a little less powerful, but I don't think any of the abilities are terrible. And I think once we add spellcasting on top of those abilities, the Arcane Trickster does quite well. So I thought the Arcane Trickster didn't need any changes. Then we go into the Assassin. The Assassin I felt needed the most changes. And I talked about this at the beginning of the video, but essentially the Assassin really pushed you into infiltration. It pushed you into a method of gameplay that I think doesn't see a lot of use at tables, and it didn't push you in the direction I thought it would, and that is the use of poisons. I kind of think of Assassins as poison users, and it didn't seem to give you anything when it comes to using poison. So going into the Assassin, the bonus proficiencies remain the same. You're getting the Disguise kit and the Poisoner's kit, but the first change I've made is to the 3rd level ability, Assassinate. As I mentioned, the ability to surprise an enemy and get critical hits is really good when you get the chance to use it, but you shouldn't expect to use it all that often. And that's fine. I mean, we adventure in parties, and we don't surprise enemies a whole lot, and that's unfortunate for the Assassin, but that's just the reality of adventuring in a team. The ability to get advantage on enemies that haven't gone yet in combat is pretty good. It's free advantage, and often when you are on your first turn with a rogue, you have to make a decision. Are you going to hide and attack, or are you going to attack and hide? Because if you hide and attack, you can often get advantage on that attack roll. But if you attack and then hide, then you will be hidden until you make another attack roll, and then you'll get advantage on that attack roll. With the Assassinate ability, of course, you get that freedom because you're going to have advantage on your first attack regardless most of the time, because most of the time you're going to win initiative because you have a good dexterity. So I think it's still a decent ability, but I wanted to add in something else that made it fit more with the other subclasses, because both Thief and Arcane Trickster give you additional things you can do with your cunning action. So I've added in addition at 3rd level, you can use the bonus action granted by your cunning action to apply an injury poison to your weapon. So we're giving them one additional thing they can do with their cunning action, and something I think that's in line with the Assassin. Now, before we get into the next 2 abilities, I think I really need to talk about what the Assassin could do before. So before, at 9th level, they got Infiltration Expertise, and what it required was that you take 7 days and 25 gold pieces, and then you could establish an identity that belonged to somebody else. And that might allow you to infiltrate somewhere. And then their 13th level ability was Imposter, which allowed them to unerringly mimic another person's speech, writing, and behavior. So again, Imposter was part of Infiltration Expertise. So right from 3rd level through 17th level, the only abilities Assassins would get was the ability to infiltrate. And not even the kind of infiltration that I generally see in gameplay. Generally, if I'm playing a game and let's say there's a castle and we're trying to get in the castle, maybe we need to steal something in the castle, and we decide we're going to do so through infiltration. Well, generally what would happen is we would come up with maybe some disguises, maybe we would create some false identities, and then we would do it. And we would probably do all those things within the same day that we decided to do that in the first place. And then the DM is going to have us make some ability checks, maybe checks on our disguise kit rolls, maybe checks on deception rolls, maybe checks on performance rolls, to deceive the enemies into thinking that we are belong in the castle. So even in the specific situation where we are using infiltration, the assassin abilities, especially the 9th level ability, we couldn't use them. It just didn't come up in regular gameplay. In order to use their infiltration expertise, you basically need to be in a static location for a long period of time and be planning this infiltration for a week or more. And that doesn't come up. And certainly, if you're doing dungeon crawling, it doesn't come up at all. But even in campaigns that are in one city, that still might not come up even if infiltration is what we want to do. So even in the case of this assassin's specialty, they have abilities specifically designed for that kind of thing that they might not be able to use. And that's really unfortunate. And I wasn't sure I understood why they really pushed the assassin as an infiltrator when assassins, of course, do other things as well. I didn't want to wipe infiltration off the board. I just wanted it to be something that would likely come up in the way that games tend to be run, and I didn't want it to be the only thing assassins got. So the first change I made was to the 9th level ability, Infiltration Expertise, and I just simplified it a ton, and I think it's something that is now going to be usable in most infiltration scenarios. Starting at 9th level, you become a master at creating false identities. Whenever you make an ability check to create a disguise or to deceive a creature by assuming a false identity, you have advantage on the roll. Super simple, definitely is the type of advantage that's going to see use when you're doing infiltration. And then the 13th level ability, I didn't make an infiltration ability, I made it a poison ability because again, I figure assassins use poisons. And now there are a number of issues with using poisons, but one of the biggest issues of using poisons is getting the poison in the first place. Number one, poisons are ridiculously expensive, and even the ones that have very little effect, like make a saving throw and if you fail you take 1d4 points of damage, that's an expensive poison to buy, and it's going to affect one attack for potentially 1d4 points of damage. No one's going to do that. So I wanted to have a way that an assassin can access poison without going down that ridiculous road. Now, potentially, any character might be able to harvest poisons using a poison kit from enemies you defeat. So you defeat a purple worm, maybe you can harvest the purple worm's poison. And generally that would require an ability roll, and it's an ability roll you really want to succeed on. But there are a very limited number of creatures for which there's rules for doing that for. And a lot of creatures even that have poison, there's just no rules for harvesting their poison. So we really don't even know if you can harvest their poison, or what effect that poison would have if you do harvest it. So like I said, I just wanted to make it so that assassin can definitely use poison. And so this is what I've done at 13th level. You've learned how to create and use poisons as a master assassin. Whenever you finish a long rest, you can use a poisoner's kit to create a deadly poison. The creation must be an ingested or injury poison, your choice. Lasts for 24 hours or until it's used. Once you create a poison this way, you may not do so again until you complete a long rest. So you get 1 poison per day. This is very similar to how a lot of other subclass abilities are set up. You take a long rest, you can create this, it lasts for a day. When you use it, it's gone. The poison is called Assassin's Death, and it's ingested or injury. A creature subjected to this poison must make a Constitution saving throw, DC 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your intelligence modifier. On a failed save, the creature takes 1d12 damage for every 5 levels you have in this class and gains the poison condition for 1 minute. If the poison is ingested, the creature is also incapacitated while poisoned this way. If the saving throw is successful, the creature takes 1/2 damage and suffers no additional effects. So, if we're going to talk about the downsides here, number one, we're going after Constitution, and Constitution is a strong saving throw. Number two, we're basing it off intelligence. I just thought intelligence was super appropriate here. But it's not going to give us the best DC we could have. Probably dexterity would give us a better DC. Still should be an okay DC, higher than most poisons for sure. And of course, the elephant in the room, lots of things are resistant or immune to poison. But I still think this is going to be an effective ability for you. The first thing is like I said, the DC is going to be higher than most poisons. It just is, even if you don't have a bonus to your intelligence. Of course, if you do have a bonus to your intelligence, now you actually get a benefit from that. The second thing is that even if you are coming against a lot of creatures that are immune to poison, probably not all creatures you're coming up against are immune to poison. Certainly in an adventuring day, there's probably one combat where you can find at least one enemy that is not immune to poison. And that's all you need, because this is a one-shot ability. So I still think that although poison immunity becomes more common as we go higher in levels, I think you're going to get to use this ability. And then finally, if they make their saving throw, they still take half damage. And the half damage is still going to be not bad damage. Remember, this is on top of your attack. This is on top of your sneak attack. And If you are the kind of assassin that slips something into somebody's drink or their food, then you will get the additional advantage that if they fail their save, they become incapacitated. And then you can finish them off real easy. So we're basically turning every assassin into a poison user at 13th level, and I think that's fine. I think assassins are probably going to be using poison. Or at least I think players who are playing assassins would like them to be able to use poison effectively. Poisoner is a way that at least you get to dip your toe into using poison, even if you're not getting poisons by any other means. And then Death Strike, I didn't change at all. It remains the same. And then that brings us into our final subclass, the Thief. Now the Thief, again, most of the abilities I actually really like for the Thief. Fast Hands, I think, is a good ability. Supreme Sneak is an okay ability. It's not super powerful, but it's fine. Use Magic Device is a great ability, and Thief's Reflexes, their capstone, is a fantastic ability that can potentially give you a third sneak attack in a round. So actually very powerful, probably the most powerful capstone of any of the rogues. The only issue I had with the Thief is second story work. In theory, second story work should be what we would expect for a cat burglar. So you're climbing up the wall, into the window, jumping across from rooftop to rooftop, and in theory, that's what second story work should do. In practice, didn't do that. What it did is it gave you an improved climb speed, and it gave you an improved jump distance. But what it didn't do is it didn't give you the ability to climb. These things are based on athletics, which is a skill that a lot of rogues don't take, and the reason a lot of rogues don't take it is because it's based on strength, and rogues aren't very good at strength, so they're going to try to use acrobatics when they can, but acrobatics definitely isn't used for climb rolls, it definitely isn't used for jump rolls. Those very specifically are athletics rolls. So what we have is a rogue who is really fast at climbing, if only they could climb, but they're going to make an ability check to climb that they're very likely going to fail, and then they're not going to be able to climb at all, and second story work does nothing. I figure a cat burglar should be good at climbing. I think a cat burglar should be good at jumping, and that's not just based on speed. That's just based on the ability to do it in the first place. So I built that into second story work. When you choose this archetype at 3rd level, you gain the athletics proficiency if you don't have it already. If you already have the athletics proficiency, you may gain proficiency in another rogue skill of your choice. You gain the ability to climb faster than normal. Climbing no longer costs you extra movement. That's the same as the original ability. In addition, when you make a running jump, the distance you cover increases by a number of feet equal to your dexterity modifier. That also is from the main ability. Whenever you make an ability check for strength athletics, for climbing or jumping, you may use your dexterity modifier in place of your strength modifier. So 2 changes here. Number 1, you're getting the athletics proficiency if you don't have it already, which is basically the proficiency you need for climbing and jumping. If this is an ability that makes you good at climbing and jumping, the first thing we need to do is make sure you can do those things in the first place. I mean, anyone can jump, but the skill that's based on jumping, the skill that's based on climbing is athletics, and climbing isn't automatic. It depends on your ability check. And then the second thing we're doing is we're making it so that athletics is no longer requiring strength specifically for the things you're supposed to be good at. So for climbing and for jumping. So now second story work is actually going to turn your rogue into the cat burglar. And that's the only change I made to Thief. So, in the end, what we did with the rogue is, number 1, after level 5, we're going to find that they're more effective in combat without requiring the optimization that would normally be required to make that happen. Number 2, Blind Sense actually works. And number 3, assassins now use poisons. Their infiltration expertise is simpler to use, and it's going to come up more commonly. And the Thief now actually gets the skill they need to do the climbing and jumping, and gets the use of the ability that they're good at for those things. So that is the Rogue, the Treantmonk variant. In following weeks, I'm going to be looking at other aspects of the player's handbook. We're going to be looking at some of the rules. We're going to be looking at races. We're going to be looking at feats, and we're going to be looking at spells. Once the player's handbook is done, then I'm going to consider this variant done. But I will probably be looking at other source books. So people are wondering about this subclass from this source book or this spell from this source book. I am going to be looking at those after the player's handbook is complete. So lots more to come up with the Treantmonk variant, and I will be back next week with some more content. So until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you next week.